And to his fellow Americans, he said American casualties are, quote, something that happens in a war. Again, those are his words. Now, Iran has responded as it previously promised to respond to the U.S.-Israeli aggression by carrying out strikes on U.S. military bases across the Middle East. Previously, it had communicated to the United States through back channels which targets would be hit. That was the case during the 12-day war. Well, this time around, it clearly indicated prior to these illegal strikes that there would be no coordination and these attacks would not be symbolic. Tonight, we're actually looking at a development that will send shockwaves through the global economy. Iran has reportedly moved to close the Strait of Hormuz, which is the single most important oil transit choke point in the entire world. Multiple vessels in the Gulf reported receiving high-frequency radio warnings from Iran's Revolutionary Guards, stating that ships would not be permitted to pass through the strait. If sustained, this would mark one of the most consequential escalations in global energy geopolitics in decades. Trump, of course, prepared well for this. Earlier this year, he carried out an illegal and also not approved by the U.S. Congress operation in Venezuela to seize its oil, as he clearly knew that he would use negotiations with Iran as a ruse. Now, the Strait of Hormuz is not just another stretch of water. It is the narrow maritime gateway that links the Persian Gulf to the Indian Ocean. Bordered by Iran to the north and Oman Musandam exclave to the south, the strait is only about 50 kilometers wide at its broadest point, and the shipping lanes themselves are just 2 miles wide in each direction. In some areas, the water is only about 60 meters deep, which makes it especially vulnerable to mines, missile strikes, or naval blockades. Why is this the global choke point, you would ask? Well, roughly 1/5 of global oil consumption flows through this corridor. 1/5 of global oil consumption. Just think about that. That's around 20 million barrels of oil per day. In addition, nearly 20% of the world's LNG, liquefied natural gas, much of it from Qatar, also transits this route. So in other words, this isn't just a regional issue. This is a global economic artery, and this is turning into a global economic crisis as a result of the United States and Israeli military action. The current crisis comes after joint missile strikes by the United States and Israel targeting Iran's regime sites and military facilities. With those strikes now carried out, Iran appears to be signaling that it is willing to use its most powerful economic leverage point in response, which is the Strait of Hormuz, closing, shutting it down. Iran sits on the northern shore of the Strait of Hormuz and controls key islands that overlook the channel, including Hormuz, Qashm, and Larak. It also holds the disputed islands of Greater Tunb, Lesser Tunb, and Abu Musa, strategically positioned vantage points that have been under Iranian control since 1971. So from these locations, Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy can obstruct shipping traffic. Oil markets were already on edge amid rising tensions and speculation about military confrontation. Even before the reported closure, Brent crude had been climbing. Analysts have warned that if Iran were to successfully block the strait in response to the U.S.-Israeli aggression, and even temporarily, oil prices could surge dramatically, potentially into the $120 to $150 range per barrel. A sustained disruption would ripple through global inflation, transport costs, manufacturing, and food prices. This is going to affect everything. More than 80% of the oil and gas passing through the strait is actually destined for Asia. China, India, Japan, and South Korea are heavily exposed. China in particular buys the overwhelming majority of Iran's oil exports and has been one of Tehran's most important diplomatic backers, of course. However, China is very heavily diversified in terms of crude oil imports. So the impact on China is likely going to be negligible. A prolonged closure, however, would not only harm Western economies, of course, it would also harm the global economy, including the economy of China. And so that raises a very interesting question. Closing the Strait of Hormuz would damage Iran's own economy because it would be unable to export its own oil. Iran depends on the same waterway to export its crude. In fact, Iranian oil shipments through the strait have been at some of their highest levels since 2018. And so a full shutdown would cut off Tehran's own revenue stream at a moment of intense economic pressure. So why take this risk? Well, because this is asymmetric conflict, and in asymmetric conflict, leverage matters. Iran's conventional military capabilities cannot match those of the United States, but geography gives Tehran a strategic card that few other countries possess. The strait is very narrow, as I discussed previously. It is very shallow, and it is very close to Iranian territory. By the way, history offers precedent. During the 1980-1988 Iran-Iraq War, the so-called tanker war saw attacks on merchant vessels and oil infrastructure. If Hormuz becomes unstable at the same time, the cumulative risk to maritime energy routes would be significant. There are very limited alternatives too. Saudi Arabia can divert some oil via its east-west pipeline to the Red Sea with capacity of around 5 million barrels per day. The UAE can also bypass Hormuz to a degree through the Habshan-Fujairah pipeline, which is capable of moving about 1.5 million barrels per day. But combined, these alternatives are not good enough. They're not going to do much because these alternatives cover only a fraction of the total volumes that normally transit through the Strait of Hormuz. So Iraq, Kuwait, Qatar, and Bahrain have little to no meaningful bypass capacity for most of their exports, and that is definitely going to hurt them. In short, if the Strait of Hormuz is truly closed for more than just a few days, global energy markets would face a severe supply shock. As the illegal attack on Iran took place and Iran is now responding to that aggression, to Trump's war of choice, let's be clear, energy markets are now facing a binary question. Is this a temporary show of force or just the beginning of a prolonged maritime crisis? Which one is it going to be? The Strait of Hormuz is not just a regional flashpoint. It is the pressure valve of the global energy system. As pressure continues to build there, the consequences extend far beyond the Gulf. And if this closure holds, we could be entering a new phase of economic warfare, one where geography, not sanctions, becomes the primary weapon. If you found this video interesting, be sure to check out more content over on my Substack and Patreon at worldaffairsincontext.com. I would love to see you there. Thanks so much for watching. I appreciate you liking, subscribing, and sharing this video if you found it helpful. And I will see you back here tomorrow. Take care.